Have you ever been out with your camera in a beautiful mountainous location, sparkling snow, absolutely pristine, but when you get those photographs home, they're a massive disappointment. The snow looks really dirty, really grey, and the image generally looks pretty underexposed and just not how you remember it at all. Well, today we're going to fix all that and get you shooting amazing photographs in snowy locations. I actually wore this as a joke, but it's so cold in here I might keep it on. Right, let's jump into Lightroom and see what's going on. So what is it that's actually gone wrong here? Well, a camera is very, very clever at trying to set the exposure within the scene, but it does this by averaging everything out. It's trying to make everything kind of like 18% grey across the whole scene. So something that's very bright will confuse it completely. If I give you a different example, let's see whether we can find something that's pretty average. Here we go. We now see the histogram has loads of information right across the board, going from the darks through to the brights and loads of stuff in the middle. And that's because we're getting some bright stuff like up in the sky, some dark stuff like you're getting in these grasses in the background here and underneath the shelter, but generally speaking they're midtones, and that allows the camera to expose quite nicely. This has been processed incidentally, but the camera itself will have got a lot of the data from this image exposed pretty nicely. When you've got a snow scene where anything that's particularly bright, it could be the sea, it could be a desert, that confuses the camera and it tries to average everything out and make it consistent, but as a result things that are super bright like white snow in the sunshine will get dropped right down and become that muddy grey. But do not fear, there's a couple of things that we can do that are really straightforward to sort this out. The first one is a corrective measure. So if we're shooting in RAW, we can fiddle around with exposure, so we can look at that first. And the second one is really handy if you're shooting in an auto or a semi-auto mode with your camera, using something called exposure compensation to get the shot right in camera out in the field. Okay, so this is a classic example really. We've got what on the face of it looks like a really underexposed scene, but if we go up to the histogram we can see what the camera was thinking at the time, that there is a spread of information in the middle of the histogram. There's nothing over on the highlights at all, so it has kind of missed an opportunity there to get that data. Probably on our image the brightest bits of where the sun is behind these clouds. So because we've shot it in RAW, we can just change the overall exposure and just bring that up until we can start seeing the snow as nice and white, and we can start seeing the main subject, the pulp bag, and our skier in a bit more detail. Now on the histogram we've got everything stacked over to the right, and very little over on the darks. What we have lost with that is some of the detail in the sky, which was quite cool. This is probably quite close to how it was originally, but we might want a little bit more depth in the sky, so we'll look at that in just a moment. If we look in on the snow itself, snow is very hard to work out what the best exposure is for it, but we can, because it is white, so we're only really looking for the shadows. So if I just take the exposure up a little bit more, it's very, very bright white there, and we just completely lose that texture. If I take it to extreme, you'll see that our subject is still reasonably well exposed. It's a bit bright, but you can see what it is, whereas the snow's lost everything. So what I'd advise is taking it too far and then just crank it back until you can start to see those ski trails and so forth, footprints there I think, and that's probably quite a good point of exposure. If we did want a bit more depth in the sky, what we could do is put a mask on, and of course now with the AI masks we can just click on sky and it's done a reasonably good job, and we could just drop the exposure of that down. Again, if I go to extreme we can see it looks all a bit wrong, but if I just drop it down a little bit, it just makes it a little bit more moody. And we might find that we also want a mask for our main subjects, which again now is super clever. We just click on the subject, it will have a think about it, and look at that, it's identified our subject pretty perfectly really. I'm just going to take that up just a touch, too much, just a touch, and with that I'm also just going to increase the saturation just to make that little bit pop. There's no point saturating snow obviously because it's white, but a little bit of saturation in that is quite good. And that takes us from the dark, underexposed, not really usable image to something that's much more recognisable as the scene. A super handy feature on cameras is this EV compensation. On my camera, which is a Sony, it's a physical dial, which is really nice. On my other cameras, like some Canons for example, it will be a little button down here-ish that you can go up and down, but essentially as I click this around, if I go up to +1, that's increasing the light by 1 stop, doubling the amount of light. So if my camera is generally on 0 and I'm getting a really sort of dirty snow, I want to brighten it up a bit, I can knock it up a stop or potentially even 2 stops until it's starting to look right and I've got really nice brightness. This is less kind of pertinent really when you're in manual, because you can just change your shutter speed and everything. So it'll tend to be when you're in shutter priority or aperture priority or auto, when you just need to kind of compensate for the camera settings. Really handy to know. If your scene's coming out too bright, if everything's overexposed, conversely you can go the other way and just decrease the value by a stop. Got increments there of thirds of a stops, 2 stops, you can go right down to 3 stops if you want to. Really handy to do, particularly in the mode that I'm generally in when I'm in the field. If I'm up a mountain, normally I'm in aperture priority, so this is just a really quick way just to adjust that exposure and get the shot. So there we go, we've managed to recover a bad situation. Our original image was really underexposed, it was struggling to expose for that snow. Because we shot in RAW, we've been able to bring it up and expose those colours and textures properly. Remember, this doesn't just work with snow, it's anything really that's super bright within the image and reflective. So anything that's water-based, whether you're out by the seaside, we've got boat type images, or even things like sand is actually really reflective, and some types of vegetation as well. So this is a really useful technique when your camera is just struggling to get that balance across the frame because you've got something super bright. Let us know how you get on. Love to see some of your images, and please do drop a comment with anything that you found particularly useful or anything that you'd like to see in future videos as well, because that is super useful to me in doing some planning. Until then, I'll see you next time.